A homeless woman heard the screech of tires, and a child's scream pierced the winter night. Without thinking, she threw herself in front of the Mafia boss's son, taking 4 bullets meant for him. She thought saving him would cost her everything she'd fought to protect. She didn't know it would force her back into a world she'd spent years trying to escape. Before we begin, I need to know, where are you watching from? Comment it right now. And don't even think about skipping. Hit that subscribe because now I'm about to start this story from the very beginning, and you won't want to miss a single shocking moment. Dr. Castellano worked in focused silence, his hands moving with the efficiency of someone who'd extracted bullets from inconvenient places many times before. Erick stood against the far wall, arms crossed, watching the woman's chest rise and fall in shallow, irregular breaths. Each exhale seemed like it might be her last. 4 entry wounds, no exit, Castellano muttered, probing the shoulder blade. She's lucky. Unlucky. I don't know which. The spine. Millimeters, Erick. Millimeters. Silas moved closer, his voice low enough that Frederick wouldn't hear from across the room. Boss, we need to talk about containment. Not now. Yes, now. Silas's jaw tightened. The Veronese know someone intervened. They'll want to know who, what she saw, what she heard. Every second she's breathing is a liability we can't afford. Erick's eyes never left Marth's face. Pallid, drawn, the kind of face that had seen too much and expected nothing. She took 4 bullets meant for my son, which makes her either the greatest asset or the greatest threat we've ever had walk into our world, Silas countered. We don't know who she is. We don't know who sent her. For all we know, this whole thing was theater. Make you trust her. Get her inside your defenses. You think someone would take 4 bullets as part of a long con? I think people do insane things for the right price. Silas leaned in. At minimum, we need to question her. Hard. Find out who she's working for, what she knows, what her angle is. And if we don't like the answers, touch her, and I'll put you in the ground next to whoever you were planning to bury her with. The words came out flat, final. Silas's mouth snapped shut. Marco approached, holding a small, clear bag with Marth's possessions. Found something, boss. Inside was the photograph Erick had already seen, but beneath it was a laminated ID badge, cracked and faded. The photo matched the woman on the table, younger, healthier, wearing a crisp uniform. The text read, NYC Emergency Medical Services, Marth Chen, paramedic, badge, Nader Goar 78. The expiration date was 3 years old. She was a paramedic, Erick said quietly. Was, Silas emphasized. Which means she either quit or got fired. Either way, she's been on the streets for years. People don't end up there by accident, boss. She's hiding from something. Or someone. Papa, Frederick's small voice cut through the tension. He'd approached without anyone noticing, his eyes fixed on Marth's pale face. Before Erick could stop him, Frederick reached out and placed his small hand on top of Marth's. She's cold, Frederick whispered. Then he looked up at his father, his expression carrying a weight no 10-year-old should possess. You always say everyone wants something. You say there's always an angle, always a price. Frederick. What did she want, Papa? His voice cracked. She didn't know me. She didn't know you. She just did it. Tears tracked down his cheeks. She did it for free. The room went silent, except for the steady beep of the monitoring equipment and Castellano's quiet work. Erick stared at his son's hand covering the unconscious woman's, and something shifted in his chest, something uncomfortable and unfamiliar. Frederick was right. There had been no negotiation, no demand for payment, no calculation of odds or benefits, just action, pure, inexplicable, irrational action. Keep her alive, Erick said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command. Whatever it takes, she stays alive. Silas opened his mouth to protest. That's not a suggestion. The armored Mercedes tore through Brooklyn's empty streets at 3 a.m. running every red light with Marco behind the wheel and 2 chase vehicles flanking them like wolves protecting their pack. Erick sat in the back, one hand braced against the roof as the vehicle took corners too fast, the other pressed against Marth's neck, feeling for a pulse that kept getting weaker. Dr. Castellano had stabilized her enough for transport, but barely. 2 IV bags hung from hooks welded into the ceiling, feeding into her arms, while temporary dressings tried to keep her blood inside her body. Frederick sat pressed against Erick's other side, his small hand wrapped around Marth's, refusing to let go. "Frederick, you should be in the other car with Silas." "No." The word came out fierce, absolute. "She stayed with me. I stay with her." The monitor strapped to Marth's chest started beeping faster, the rhythm becoming irregular. Castellano, crammed into the front passenger seat, twisted around, his face tight. "Her pressure's dropping. We're losing her." "How far?" Erick demanded. 4 minutes, Marco called back, the speedometer pushing past 70 on a street built for 30. "Make it 2. The monitor's beeping turned frantic, then suddenly flattened into a sustained tone that made Erick's stomach drop. Castellano was already moving, awkward in the confined space, his hands on Marth's chest, starting compressions. Frederick's grip on her hand tightened, his knuckles white. "Papa, what's happening? Why did the sound change?" "Her heart stopped," Erick said, the words tasting like ash. "The doctor's trying to restart it." "But she can't die." Frederick's voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. "She can't. She saved me. That means something. That has to mean something." Castellano counted compressions under his breath, paused to check, then resumed. The terrible flat tone continued. "Papa, you always teach me that everything is a transaction," Frederick said, his words tumbling out, desperate and fast. "You say everyone wants something. Everyone has a price. You say that's how the world works. That's how you survive." The monitor beeped once, twice, then found a rhythm again. Castellano exhaled hard. "We got her back, but we need that facility now." "What did she want?" Frederick looked up at his father, his eyes searching. "When she ran at those guns, when she put herself in front of me, what was her price, Papa? What did she want?" Erick stared at the unconscious woman who'd destroyed his understanding of human nature in a single, impossible act. The tattoos on his hands. The surgical suite's observation window glowed with harsh fluorescent light as Castellano worked over Marth's exposed back. Erick stood with his arms crossed, watching the doctor's hands move with practiced precision, extracting metal that had been meant for his son. Heavy footsteps approached from behind. Erick didn't need to turn to know who it was. "We need to talk." Dario's voice carried the weight of 20 years as Erick's senior advisor. "Now." "I'm watching. You're making a mistake." Dario moved to stand beside him, his reflection stern in the glass. "The Veronese hit you tonight. They failed, but they got close enough to put your son in the crosshairs. That's a declaration of war, and our response needs to be immediate and overwhelming." "I'm aware." "Are you? Because right now, instead of planning retaliation, you're protecting a witness who can put you at a crime scene with multiple bodies." "She's not a witness. She's the reason Frederick is alive." "She's a liability." Dario's voice hardened. "The families are already talking. Word spreads fast. By morning, everyone will know that Erick Aguirre is protecting some homeless woman. They'll see it as weakness. They'll see it as sentiment, and sentiment gets you killed." Through the glass, Castellano paused, frowning at something. He gestured to his nurse, who adjusted the overhead light. "Look at this." Castellano's voice came through the intercom speaker. "These aren't fresh." Erick leaned closer to the window. Even through the blood and surgical field, he could see what the doctor meant. Marth's back and sides were mapped with scars, some old and faded, others more recent. Not the random marks of street violence, but systematic. Defensive wounds on her forearms, healed fractures that had set poorly, the kind of damage that came from prolonged trauma. 3 broken ribs that healed wrong, Castellano continued, more to himself than anyone. Compound fracture to the left radius, no surgical intervention. Extensive bruising patterns consistent with repeated blunt force trauma over months, maybe years. And these burns on her hands, Chemical, not thermal. What does that mean? Frederick's voice came from behind them. He'd been sitting in the corner so quietly that Erick had almost forgotten he was there. It means someone hurt her, Erick said quietly. Badly. For a long time. And then she lived on the streets for at least a year based on her condition, Dario added. Malnourished, hypothermic, probably hasn't seen real medical care in forever. This woman is broken, Erick. Whatever happened to her, she's been running from it. You want to tie yourself to that kind of damage? She tied herself to us first, Frederick said, his young voice cutting through the room with unexpected force. She didn't run from the bullets, she ran toward them. Dario turned to face the boy. Frederick, you're young. You don't understand. I understand that everyone in this room makes deals. Everyone calculates, everyone protects themselves first. Frederick's eyes, red from crying, locked onto his father's. Except her. She didn't calculate anything. She just saved me. Erick felt the familiar pull of competing instincts. Every strategic bone in his body agreed with Dario. Marth was a wild card, an unknown variable in an equation that demanded precision. The smart play was to eliminate the risk. But Frederick's words echoed in his mind. What did she want? Nothing. She'd wanted nothing, and that impossibility had just saved his son's life. She stays, Erick said finally, under protection, under observation, but she stays. Dario's jaw tightened. You're letting your son's emotions cloud your judgment. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally seeing clearly. Marth woke to silk sheets and the smell of expensive leather. The ceiling above her was cream-colored, smooth, dotted with recessed lighting that created a soft glow instead of the harsh fluorescence she'd expected. Her body screamed with every shallow breath, pain radiating from her back and shoulders in waves that made her vision blur. She tried to sit up, made it 3 inches before the agony forced her back down, gasping. Not a hospital. Hospitals had beeping machines and sterile white walls and the constant shuffle of nurses. This room was quiet, elegant, decorated like something from a magazine she'd never be able to afford. Dark wood furniture, thick curtains, a door that probably led to a bathroom bigger than the loading dock she'd been sleeping under. A prison dressed as luxury. Marth forced herself up again, biting back the scream that wanted to tear from her throat. Her left arm was useless, immobilized in a sling. Her right trembled as she pushed herself to sitting, then standing. The room tilted violently, but she grabbed the bedpost and held on until the spinning stopped. She'd taken 2 steps toward the door when it opened. The tattooed man from the street filled the doorway, still wearing his expensive suit, though the jacket was gone now and his sleeves were rolled up. Up close, she could see the details of the ink crawling up his forearms. Intricate, deliberate, the kind of tattoos that told stories to people who knew how to read them. You should be in bed. His voice was calm, neutral, the tone of someone used to being obeyed. I should be invisible. Marth's voice came out hoarse, raw. I should be nobody. And now I'm here, wherever here is, and that means I'm somebody to you, which means I'm dead. He stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. Sit down before you fall down. I need to leave. That's not possible. You don't understand. The room spun again, and Marth grabbed for the bedpost, missed, started to fall. He caught her before she hit the floor, his grip firm but surprisingly gentle as he guided her back to the bed. I understand perfectly, he said, settling her against the pillows. You've spent the last year making yourself invisible, living in the spaces between people's attention, and in one night, you threw all of that away to save a stranger's child. Marth's throat tightened. I just need to disappear again. I need to. They know who you are now, Marth. He pulled a chair closer, sat down so they were at eye level. The people who tried to kill my son saw you. They know you matter to me, which means you can't go back to being nobody. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her one rule, her single path to survival, shattered. Then I'm dead anyway, she whispered. Not while I'm alive. The door opened again, softer this time. Frederick slipped in carrying a tray that wobbled dangerously in his small hands. Toast, blackened at the edges. Soup in a bowl that looked like it had been microwaved too long, the surface forming a weird film. I made breakfast, Frederick announced, setting the tray on the bedside table with intense concentration. Papa said you need to eat. Marth stared at the burnt offering, something cracking in her chest. Does it hurt a lot? Frederick asked, his eyes wide and worried. The bullets. Yes, but you did it anyway. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her. Why? Were you not scared? Marth looked at this child who'd watched her take bullets meant for him, who'd made her terrible breakfast with his own hands and told him the truth. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do it because you are. The conference room in Erick's Brighton Beach compound had hosted 100 difficult conversations. Territorial disputes, betrayals, sentences of death delivered over glasses of expensive scotch. But the tension crackling through the air tonight felt different, more volatile, like everyone knew they were standing at a crossroads. 6 men sat around the mahogany table, Silas and Dario on Erick's right, Marco and 3 other senior capos facing them, all of them waiting for Erick to speak. The Marth situation, Dario began when the silence stretched too long. We need a resolution. She's been under protection for 3 days, Silas added. 3 days of bleeding resources, manpower, and attention while the Veronese are regrouping. We're vulnerable, and it's because we're babysitting a homeless woman who should have died in that alley. She saved Frederick, Marco said quietly, and we're grateful. Dario's tone was measured, reasonable. But gratitude doesn't change the tactical reality. She's a witness. She saw faces, heard names, watched us execute 3 men. The longer she lives, the greater the exposure. She's not going to talk, Erick said. You don't know that. Silas leaned forward. You don't know anything about her, except she was living on the streets and she has a death wish. That's not exactly a stable profile. Castellano found evidence of long-term abuse, Marco offered. Whoever she was running from. Makes her even more unpredictable, Dario interrupted. Damaged people make damaged decisions, and right now, every family from here to Manhattan knows you're protecting her. They're watching to see if you've gone soft, if sentiment has replaced strategy. What are you suggesting? Erick's voice went cold. Silas and Dario exchanged a glance. 1 bullet, Silas said. Quick, painless, we bury her somewhere quiet and this problem disappears. The door to the conference room slammed open. Frederick stood in the doorway, his small frame rigid with fury, his face flushed. No. Frederick, Erick started to rise. You say family means everything. Frederick's voice shook but didn't break as he walked into the room staring down men 3 times his age. You say loyalty is what separates us from animals. You say you pay your debts no matter the cost. Son, this is grown-up business. She paid the cost for me, Frederick shouted, tears streaming down his face. She didn't know me. She didn't know my name or who Papa was or what any of this meant. And she still took 4 bullets meant for me. 4! Because she thought I mattered more than she did. The room had gone completely silent. You sit here talking about strategy and exposure and problems. Frederick's hands were clenched into fists. But if you kill her, if you hurt her after what she did, then everything you've ever taught me about family and loyalty and honor is a lie. All of it. Just words you use to control people. Dario opened his mouth to speak. If she's not family, Frederick continued, his voice dropping to something harder, older, then your word means nothing. And if your word means nothing, why should anyone follow you? Erick stared at his son, seeing himself reflected and reshaped in those fierce, young eyes. Frederick had taken every lesson Erick had taught him about power and loyalty and twisted it into something Erick himself had forgotten. That some debts transcended calculation. She stays, Erick said, his voice carrying absolute finality. Under my protection, as family. Silas started to protest. Boss, you can't be serious. Anyone who questions this decision questions me. Erick's gaze swept the table. And anyone who touches her answers to me personally. Are we clear? The silence that followed was answer enough. Frederick remained standing, his small chest heaving until Erick nodded toward the door. Only then did the boy leave, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. "You're making a mistake," Dario said quietly. "Maybe." Erick stood, adjusting his cufflinks. "But it's my mistake to make." The attack came at 4 a.m. when the guard rotation was changing. Marth jerked awake to the sound of gunfire, not the distant pops she'd grown used to on the streets, but close, immediate, the sharp cracks of automatic weapons tearing through the night. The window to her left exploded inward, glass spraying across the bed as she rolled off the mattress on instinct, her healing wounds screaming in protest. The door burst open. Marco, weapon drawn, his face grim. "Panic room, now!" "What's happening?" "Move!" He grabbed her good arm and pulled her into the hallway. More gunfire, closer now, and shouting in a language Marth didn't recognize. Marco shoved her toward a section of wall that looked solid but swung open under his palm, revealing a reinforced steel door. Frederick was already inside the small room, pressed against the back wall with 2 armed guards flanking him. His eyes went wide when he saw Marth. "Get in!" Marco barked, practically throwing her through the entrance. The steel door slammed shut behind her with a hydraulic hiss, cutting off the sounds of battle. The panic room was maybe 8 feet square, lined with monitors showing security camera feeds. Marth watched the screens, her heart pounding, as black-clad figures moved through the compound with tactical precision. Not random violence, coordinated, professional. "They're coming through the east perimeter," one of the guards said into his radio. 6, maybe 8 hostiles. On the screen, Marth saw Erick in the main hallway, flanked by Silas and 3 others, returning fire. The attackers were pushing hard toward something specific, toward the wing where Marth's room was located. "They're not trying to kill Papa," Frederick whispered, his face pale. "They're trying to get past him." The guard's radio crackled, Erick's voice tight with fury. "They're asking for the woman. They want Marth alive." The words hit her like a physical blow. "No," Marth breathed. "No, no, no." She'd known, logically, that saving Frederick would have consequences. But understanding it intellectually and feeling the reality crash down were entirely different things. They weren't here for territory or revenge or power. They were here for her. Because she mattered now. Because she was leverage. Because the one good thing she'd done in a year of desperate survival had painted a target on her back that would never disappear. "I just wanted to be invisible," Marth heard herself say, her voice breaking. "I just wanted to help him, that's all. I just wanted to do one good thing." The carefully constructed shell she'd built around herself, the armor of anonymity that had kept her alive, shattered completely. She sank to the floor, her back against the steel wall, and the sobs came in great heaving waves that made her wounds burn. "I can't be somebody," she gasped. "I can't. If I'm somebody, they find me. If they find me, everything happens again. I've been dead before, and I can't do it again." Frederick dropped to his knees beside her, his small hand finding hers. "It's my fault," he said, his voice thick with tears. "If I wasn't Papa's son, if I was just a normal kid, you would be safe. You'd still be invisible." Marth looked at this child who'd watched her bleed, who'd made her burnt toast, who now blamed himself for her terror. "You didn't do this," she managed. "But Papa's world did." Frederick looked up at the monitors showing his father fighting. "His world makes everyone dangerous, even good people." On the screens, the attackers were retreating, dragged back by overwhelming firepower. But the damage was done. The steel door opened 20 minutes later. Erick stood in the entrance, blood on his shirt, his expression unreadable as he took in Marth's tear-stained face and his son's devastated expression. For the first time since the shooting, Erick saw what his protection had actually done. It had turned her single act of courage into a life sentence. The rooftop garden was Erick's private sanctuary, a space most of his organization didn't even know existed. Green plants in expensive planters, a small fountain trickling water, wrought iron furniture that cost more than most people's cars. The morning sun was soft, almost kind as it filtered through the lattice overhead. Marth sat in one of the chairs, her arm still in a sling, staring at nothing. She'd barely spoken since the attack 3 days ago. Erick settled into the chair across from her, a manila folder in his hands. "I have a solution," he said. Marth's eyes didn't move from the middle distance. "I've arranged everything. New identity, complete background, education records, employment history. You'll work as a medical consultant for one of my legitimate businesses. Apartment in a secure building, protection detail that stays invisible unless you need them. Salary, benefits, everything clean and legal." He slid the folder across the small table between them. Marth didn't touch it. "You'll be safe," Erick continued. "The Veronese won't touch you. No one will. You'll have a life again, a real one. Under your control," Marth said quietly. "Under my protection." "Same thing." Finally, she looked at him, and the emptiness in her eyes made something twist in Erick's chest. "You want to own my sacrifice. You want to take what I did and turn it into a business deal. Services rendered, payment accepted. Nice and transactional." "I'm trying to help you." "No." Marth's voice hardened. "You're trying to make yourself feel better. You're trying to turn what I did into something that makes sense in your world. But it doesn't, and it never will." Erick leaned forward. "Then tell me what you want. Name it. Anything." "I want to be nobody again." The words came out raw, desperate. "I want to walk down a street and have no one look at me. I want to disappear into a crowd and know that I'm not a target or an asset or a problem to be solved. I want to be invisible. That's not possible anymore. Because of you." Marth stood, her chair scraping against the tiles. "I helped your son. That's all I did. One decent thing. And you turned it into this prison of luxury and protection and gratitude. You took my anonymity. You took my safety. You took the only thing I had left. I'm trying to give you something better." "I don't want better." Her voice cracked. "I want invisible. I want nothing. I want to be the person no one remembers, no one notices, no one cares about. Because that person was safe. That person could sleep at night. That person could choose to do good without it destroying everything." The words hung in the air between them. Erick stared at this woman who'd taken 4 bullets for his son and was now begging for the poverty and obscurity he'd spent his entire life clawing out of. It made no sense. It violated every principle he'd built his empire on. But Frederick's question echoed in his mind. What did she want, Papa? And the terrible answer was nothing. She'd wanted nothing then, and she wanted nothing now. "The life you want," Erick said slowly, each word careful. "Where you were invisible, where you could disappear. That ended when you saved Frederick." Marth's shoulders sagged. "I took that from you," Erick continued, the admission costing him something he couldn't name. "My world, my enemies, my debt. I took your invisibility, and I can never give it back." "Then I'm already dead," Marth whispered, "just in a prettier cage." The private school's playground was visible through wrought iron fencing, expensive and ornate, designed to look decorative while serving as a barrier between the privileged children inside and the rest of the world. Erick stood on the public sidewalk, hands in his coat pockets, watching Frederick play soccer with classmates who had no idea who his father was or what that meant. Frederick laughed at something another boy said, the sound carrying across the manicured lawn. Happy? Normal. Untouched by the weight Erick carried every day. "For now!" A teacher noticed Erick standing there and started walking toward the fence, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. Erick turned and walked away before she could reach him, pulling out his phone. The call connected on the second ring. "Boss!" "Dario, I need information. Discreet channels only." 20 minutes later, Erick sat alone in his car, 3 blocks from the school, staring at the research Dario's team had compiled. Marth Chen, former paramedic, decorated, multiple commendations for bravery. Then a 911 call, a domestic violence situation gone wrong, a patient who died because she hesitated, because the abuser had been her own partner and she'd frozen for 3 critical seconds. The investigation cleared her. The guilt destroyed her anyway. She'd disappeared into the streets a month after the funeral, leaving behind a career, an apartment, an entire identity, choosing invisibility over the unbearable weight of being seen, being judged, being remembered as the woman who failed. Erick's phone buzzed, a text from Frederick's school. Mr. Aguirre, Frederick would like you to attend parent lunch on Thursday. He stared at the message, then looked at the file on Marth, then at the empty passenger seat where Frederick's mother used to sit before she'd packed her bags and left without a forwarding address. She'd left a note. One sentence. I can't watch him grow up to become you. The phone rang. Erick answered without checking the caller ID. Papa, Frederick's voice, small and uncertain. The teacher said you were outside the fence. Were you watching me? Yes. Why didn't you come in? Because your world and my world can't touch, Erick thought. Because the moment they do, you stop being safe. Frederick, do you remember your mother? Silence on the other end, then. A little. She smelled nice. She sang songs in Spanish. She left because she couldn't live with what I do, with the danger, the violence, the cost of this life. She loved you more than anything, but she loved you enough to leave rather than watch you grow up in my world. Did you want her to stay? Every day since? Then why didn't you change? Why didn't you leave this life for her? The question Erick had asked himself 1,000 times, usually at 3 a.m. when the empire he'd built felt more like a prison than power. Because I didn't know how, Erick said quietly. And by the time I figured it out, it was too late. Papa, if you could go back, would you choose differently? Erick closed his eyes, seeing Marth's face when she'd begged for invisibility, seeing his son's face when armed men came for the woman who'd saved him, seeing his wife's face the day she'd walked out with a suitcase and broken heart. Yes, he said softly. I would choose differently. He ended the call and dialed Dario. I need a complete disappearance. Legal, untraceable, permanent. New identity, new city, new life. Everything clean. No strings, no surveillance, no protection detail. Real freedom. For the woman? For Marth. And Dario? This stays between us. No one else knows. Not Silas. Not Marco. No one. Boss, if you're doing what I think you're doing, I'm giving her what she actually wants. Not what I think she should want. For the first time in 30 years, Erick Aguirre was paying a debt without expecting anything in return. The drive took 4 hours, heading north along the coast until Brooklyn's skyline disappeared behind them and the landscape opened into small towns where people still left their doors unlocked. Erick drove in silence and Marth sat in the passenger seat, watching the world change through the window. They stopped in a town called Millbrook Harbor, population 3,200. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, which meant a newcomer would be noticed but not scrutinized. Quaint shops, a library, a diner with checkered tablecloths visible through the windows. Erick parked in front of a small apartment building 2 blocks from the water. Brick, old but well-maintained, with flower boxes in the windows. 3rd floor, Unit 3B. He handed her a set of keys and an envelope. Lease is paid for a year. Inside you'll find documents, birth certificate, social security card, driver's license, employment records. Your name is Elaine Ross. You're a medical transcriptionist working remotely for a company based in Portland. Everything's legitimate. Everything checks out. Marth stared at the envelope like it might explode. There's also a bank account with enough money to last 2 years if you're careful. After that, the job pays enough to cover rent and expenses. No one will look for you here. No one will find you. Why? The word came out barely a whisper. Because you asked for invisibility, and I took it from you. Erick's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This is the only way I know to give it back. A second car pulled up behind them. Marco got out, opened the back door, and Frederick tumbled out before anyone could stop him. He ran to Marth's side of the car, pressing something against the window. Marth opened the door, and Frederick thrust a piece of paper into her hands. A drawing, carefully colored, showing 3 stick figures, one tall with dark hair and tattoos, one small with a soccer ball, one in the middle with her arms spread wide, protecting the small figure, surrounded by hand-drawn stars. I made this for you, Frederick said, his voice thick. So you remember that what you did mattered. Even if nobody else knows about it, I know. Papa knows. Marth's vision blurred. She folded the drawing carefully, holding it against her chest. You deserve to be normal, Frederick continued, and the words sounded too old for his young voice. You deserve to be safe and boring and invisible. You deserve everything good. She pulled him into a hug, careful of her still healing shoulder, and felt him hold on tight. Thank you, she whispered into his hair, for letting me be brave. When Frederick finally let go, his face was wet with tears. Marco guided him back to the car, and Erick watched them in the rearview mirror before turning back to Marth. There's no debt between us anymore, he said. You're free. Marth nodded, unable to speak, and stepped out of the car with her envelope and her keys and Frederick's drawing clutched in her hands. She didn't look back as Erick drove away. 3 weeks later, Erick stood at the dock where the ambush had happened. The bloodstains were long gone, washed away by rain and deliberately scrubbed clean. The bullet holes in the warehouse wall had been patched. Silas and Dario stood behind him waiting. New rule, Erick said, his voice carrying across the empty lot. No child will ever be targeted to get to me. Not Frederick, not anyone's child. Any family that violates this answers to all of us. No exceptions, no negotiations. Boss, that's going to be seen as weakness. Let them see it however they want. Erick turned to face his men. The woman who saved my son asked for nothing and expected nothing. She taught me that some things matter more than power. Frederick's learning that lesson. Maybe it's time I did too. 400 miles away, Elaine Ross stood in her small apartment, holding a cup of coffee and looking out at the harbor. Frederick's drawing was taped to her refrigerator, the only decoration in the sparse space. She'd walked to the grocery store that morning. No one had looked at her twice. She'd bought milk and bread and cereal, ordinary things, and the cashier had smiled and told her to have a nice day without any recognition, any fear, any weight behind the words. For the first time in 2 years, Marth allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could disappear into normal again. That the debt of 4 bullets had finally been paid. Not with money or protection or gratitude, but with the rarest gift of all, the freedom to be nobody. She'd saved a child she didn't know. She'd asked for nothing in return. And in the end, the most powerful man in Brooklyn learned that the greatest act of power was letting her go. If this story moved you, if Marth's sacrifice and Erick's transformation reminded you that even in the darkest places, redemption is possible, hit that like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this, stories about the cost of courage and the true meaning of freedom, are what we're here to tell. Drop a comment and tell me, could you have done what Marth did? Could you have let her go like Erick did? Your story matters too. Let's build a community where these questions mean something. See you in the next one. Stay brave.